We need news reporting that puts the people as its top priority, not the government, not the corporations. And that's where independent world television and the real news come in.
It's been almost 2 months since the US Congress voted to bail out its financial institutions, with much of the world following in step with similar packages. Yet, we still find ourselves in the midst of a global financial crisis. While we speak, another pillar of the US economy, the automotive sector, is seeking its own bailout, trying to convince Congress to award them $25 billion to save them from insolvency. Yesterday, automotive giants Ford and GM saw their stocks hit 23 and 66-year lows respectively. Meanwhile, GM announced that it will be closing 5 of its North American plants for 2 to 3 weeks due to lack of demand. Joining us to discuss the situation is Jim Stanford, economist for Canada's largest union, the Canadian Auto Workers Union, and Justin Fox, who writes the Curious Capitalist column for Time magazine. Justin joins us from New York City. Welcome to you both.
Thank you, Jackie.
Thanks for joining us. So, obviously, the situation does not look good for the automotive sector. I'd like to start with perhaps, Jim, if you could give us a sense of what exactly we're looking at the moment in terms of the automotive sector. What are we looking at in terms of job losses and so on? Tell us how bad is the situation at the moment.
Well, in North America, of course, the auto companies weren't in great shape to start with. We've had several years of declining market share in North America, growing imports from offshore, more or less continual job cuts, plant closures, and so on. Then came the financial crisis, and now what we've seen in the last 3 months or so is a dramatic turning up of the temperature, if you like, facing the industry as a fallout from the financial crisis. You've had a real credit freeze in the US market in particular. It hasn't been experienced as badly in Canada, where even if you were willing to buy a new car, and who would want to buy a new car these days if you read the headlines, you can't get credit to buy a new car. Car dealers can't get credit to place wholesale orders with the automakers, and then the parts companies and other auto producers can't get the credit for their normal day-to-day operations. It's that credit freeze which has really suddenly ground the industry to a halt. And companies that looked like they had a restructuring plan, a turnaround plan, and so on, are suddenly finding that the sales are plummeting to the lowest levels per capita since World War II, very suddenly. Their operating cash is drying up. And that's why GM warned last week that they will run out of operating money by the end of this year. So the current moment is them panicking, trying to get some credit, some government assistance in conjunction probably with private banks, frankly. I'm not sure if there'll be any taxpayers' money involved or not. So far we're talking about loan guarantees for private loans, something to keep them going, keep them in business until the bottom is found in this recession and they can start to carry on with their restructuring. So it's a very, very grim situation, no doubt about it.
Right. And Justin, what do you think about, we will get stuck into a discussion about the bailout being proposed in our next segment, but I'm just wondering whether the car industry should have been better prepared for a situation like this. Could they have been better prepared for a situation like this?
I mean, I'm sure there's some sense that in the early 90s, if everybody in Detroit was was clairvoyant, they could have been much, much better prepared. I do think to a certain extent, Jim's right, that they were already in the process of sort of getting ready for a new era, and they just kind of have suddenly run out of time, basically. So at some level, yes, of course they could have been more prepared, but it's not like over the past 2 or 3 or 4 years at least, they haven't been trying to get themselves ready for a different world where they sell fewer cars.
So what sort of solutions can we find here if there isn't a bailout directly given to the car industry? Is there any other way out?
My initial reaction when I was thinking about this is, we have this thing in the U.S., and I don't know what Canadian bankruptcy code is like, but we have Chapter 11, and it's designed to help companies stay alive when they're dealing with problems with their debts. And it basically gives you this time out where you get to tear up all your contracts and renegotiate them in a way that keeps you alive. That's the idea. Now, and GM in particular has made the argument that, in normal times you can get financing to do that. while you're having your bankruptcy timeout. Right now, we're in the middle of this credit crisis. GM's a really big company.
How do you respond to that, Jim? If there's, can we allow these companies to fail?
Well, I don't think we can allow the auto industry to fail. I think the automotive industry is a pillar of our overall economy. It's unique for many reasons: the level of productivity, the level of incomes, the spin-off jobs. About 7.5 jobs in total depend indirectly on each job in a major auto facility. It accounts for about 10% of world trade. A country that isn't involved in the auto industry is going to face a constant downward drain on their balance of payments. And that's what we've seen in countries like the UK and Italy, which allowed their auto industries to just wither away. So that's why governments around the world have always been proactive in promoting and nurturing industries like the auto industry and others that have similar characteristics: aerospace, telecommunications, biotech, other high technology prize industries, if you like. In North America, for the last couple of decades, we haven't done that. We've kind of followed the free trade model instead. We've opened up our market. We haven't demanded anything in terms of investment and production here, and therefore it's no coincidence that North American producers are the ones on death's door. There's also a credit crisis in Europe, by the way, and a recession, and auto companies there are in trouble as well. They're also getting government support, but they've entered this crisis in a much stronger position because they had active government support all along. Same is true in Japan and Korea. Companies like Toyota, Honda, Hyundai have benefited from strong government support, a very protected domestic home market, which is their base for going out and conquering world markets, and ongoing government assistance, whether it's technology, skills, management of the currency, and so on. In North America, we haven't done that, so our companies have entered this moment of crisis in a much, much weaker situation. And we're now in a situation where they could go under entirely. Now, what does go under mean? One option is, as Justin said, bankruptcy protection. We have a parallel to Chapter 11 in Canada. It's called the Companies and Creditors Arrangements Act. What it does, as he said, is allow the company to keep operating if they can find credit to keep operating while they rip up some of their contracts and so on. A couple of issues here. In the auto industry, people figure if a company is in bankruptcy protection, most people aren't going to want to buy a car from them. The reason is when you buy a car, you're not just buying the car, you're buying a 5-year relationship in terms of the warranty and so on that come after it. So it could have a very negative impact on their sales. Secondly, they have to get short-term financing to help them through that, and credit markets have seized up. The third issue, I think, is I don't think even bankruptcy protection addresses the structural weaknesses in the North American industry. I mean, our labor costs in Canada, for example, are lower than in Germany and Japan. So suppose they did go into bankruptcy protection, rip up the labor agreements and cut wages. Is that going to solve the problem? I don't think so. People weren't staying away from GM products because they were too expensive. In fact, they were considerably cheaper than Toyotas and Hondas. There was something else going on in terms of investment, product development, trade flows that explain why these companies are in the bind that they're in. And I don't think bankruptcy protection is going to solve any of those issues.
Thanks for watching. Please join us again tomorrow as we get further into this debate on the proposed $25 billion bailout for the US automotive industry. In part 2, we'll discuss Justin Fox's Chapter 11 proposal with more depth and how Jim Stanford responds to that from a union perspective.
Endless wars, abuse of powers, declining living standards, and the climate change crisis. The stakes couldn't be greater in the US 2008 presidential elections. And with your help, we're moving our news operation to Washington, D.C., where we'll focus on money and corruption. For example, big oil and arms companies shape American economic and foreign policy with far-reaching effects on the lives of ordinary people. With allies in government, trade unions, the media, and in think tanks, they're a hidden hand that controls the commanding heights of American politics. Taking on the industrial military complex is what real change requires. Even former presidents and high administration officials have said so. But corporate television news treats such positions as marginal. Well, we think it's the decisive issue in the coming presidential elections. Uncompromising journalism requires questioning assumption, interrogating structures of wealth and power. Corporate TV news just won't do it. Only a news organization that's truly independent can tackle such issues with courage and tenacity. And we'll take on corporate TV news live. You'll watch TV news with our panel of writers, journalists, scientists, and historians. You'll be able to join in by phone, webcam, chat. Together, we'll discuss and debate what's the real story and take on the myth and the propaganda. But this is only possible if you support us now. We need to prove that a viewer-funded model works. So if you want the real news, we need you now. Please click on the donate button and give generously. Now's the time to decide if you want the real news to thrive.
Your tax-deductible donation makes it possible. Please contribute at therealnews.com.